An endless sea of snow spreads across the frontier, cold winds howling like ghosts of the past. A solitary cowboy, Wyatt Colton, rides through the storm with his loyal dog Scout by his side, each flake stinging their skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Suddenly, Scout darts away, barking frantically at a small figure half buried in white drifts. Under layers of frost lies a mysterious young woman, her breath barely a whisper. Little does Wyatt realize that rescuing this stranger, left for dead in the savage blizzard, will ignite a chain of events tied to a promise made long ago. Wyatt Colton had never been one to believe in fate. He was a man of routine, a rancher by birth, and a cowboy by trade, who spent most of his time tending cattle or mending fences on the open range. He grew up on the outskirts of Cheyenne, Wyoming, during an era when the West was still wild. His father, Albert Colton, had fought tooth and nail for their small parcel of land, and Wyatt carried that same fierce determination in his blood. Yet on this bitter January evening, as dusk settled and snow began to fall like dusty feathers, he felt a strange unease prickling the back of his neck. By Wyatt's side trotted Scout, a whip-smart Australian shepherd, who was more partner than pet. Scout had accompanied Wyatt through stampedes, showdowns, and endless lonely nights. He was known for his keen nose and unyielding loyalty. So when Scout halted, muzzle raised to the wind ears, stiff, Wyatt knew something was wrong. The dog gave a low growl, stepping carefully in the deepening snow. A gust of wind nearly knocked Wyatt's hat off, but he hunched his shoulders, guiding his horse forward, following Scout's lead. It didn't take long before the moonlight revealed a small mound in the snow, a human figure. Wyatt felt his heart jolt. Dropping from his horse, he rushed toward the lifeless shape. Scout barked, circling around, whining with urgency. Kneeling beside the body, Wyatt brushed away the snow to reveal a young woman. Her skin turned pale and blue. Her clothing was torn, her hair matted with ice. There was no immediate sign of who she was, just a face marked by bruises. Wyatt pressed a hand to her neck, praying for a sign of life. Beneath his rough, calloused palm, he felt the faintest pulse. Acting on instinct, Wyatt scooped her up in his arms. She was light, alarmingly so, as though the cold had drained every ounce of strength from her. Struggling against the biting wind, he carried her to his horse. With careful effort, he balanced her across the saddle, securing her before mounting behind. Scout bounded ahead, blazing a path. It was all Wyatt could do to keep her warm, pressing her against his chest, hoping his body heat would stave off the Reaper's clutch until he could get her to safety. The ride back to Colton Ranch was a battle against nature itself. Snow fell in heavy sheets, and every inch forward felt like trudging through a frozen swamp. Still, Wyatt pushed on. When he finally saw the familiar silhouette of the ranch house, a surge of relief washed over him. He dismounted quickly and called for help. His ranch hand, a former Union soldier named Dale Abernathy, rushed to assist. Together they carried the woman inside, where the warmth of the hearth awaited. Little did Wyatt know, as he laid her on the sofa and summoned Dr. William Farnsworth, that the course of his life and hers had changed irrevocably. The young woman's rescue sent ripples of tension throughout the ranch. Dale Abernathy spread word to the other hands that Wyatt had brought in a mysterious stranger found on the verge of death in a snowstorm. Curiosity mingled with concern, for it was rare to find travelers out on the plains in the heart of winter. As Dr. Farnsworth worked feverishly to revive her, Wyatt and Dale prepared hot water, fetched blankets, and stoked the fire until the room was ablaze with warmth. Outside, the wind continued to howl, rattling the windows like a restless spirit trying to break in. Dr. Farnsworth was well respected in Cheyenne, a man who had treated Wyatt since childhood. He checked the young woman's pulse, listening intently to her shallow breaths. "She's got hypothermia," he pronounced some broken ribs, "and from the looks of these bruises, she's been in a brutal altercation. I'll do everything I can for her, Wyatt, but she's in a bad way." Wyatt nodded, anxiety tugging at him. He had rarely seen the good doctor's face so grim. Nevertheless, Farnsworth administered a concoction of warming tonics and gently checked for internal injuries. That night, as the storm continued to rage, Wyatt couldn't rest. He drifted from the fireplace to the sofa, where the woman lay listening for the slightest sign of her condition. The flickering firelight revealed her battered face, her parted lips and eyelashes rimmed with ice. How had she come to be in that terrible spot alone and so badly beaten? Had she escaped from some unspeakable threat or been left for dead by an enemy? Wyatt's mind spun with possibilities. He fed Scout a piece of jerky, patting the dog's head in silent gratitude. Without Scout's keen senses, the woman would surely have perished. In his sleepless vigil, Wyatt remembered an old conversation with his father. Albert Colton, now buried on a sunny knoll overlooking the ranch, had once spoken of an arrangement. A distant cousin or friend of the family had a daughter rumored to be promised to Wyatt from childhood. Wyatt had scoffed at the notion. He wanted to carve his own path, find his own wife in time, not be bound to old-world customs. But for some reason, that memory emerged in his thoughts, now persistent and unbidden. It was as if the woman lying near death in his living room had triggered a recollection from the dusty corners of his past. As dawn broke, the howling wind subsided, leaving the world outside blanketed in thick, silent snow. Wyatt dozed off in a chair, exhaustion finally overtaking him. A sudden cough startled him awake. His gaze snapped to the sofa where Dr. Farnsworth still hovered. The woman stirred her eyes, fluttering open briefly. She tried to speak, but the words were too weak to form. Instead, her gaze locked on Wyatt, a quiet, desperate plea shining in her hazel eyes. Then, just as quickly, they closed again. Wyatt's heart pounded. In that moment, with her fragile life tethered by a thin thread, he felt a powerful urge to protect her, whoever she was, however she'd come to this place. 2 days later, the storm had finally subsided, and the ranch was enveloped in a hushed, wintry calm. The young woman remained bedridden, her body fighting to heal from exposure and injuries. Wyatt checked on her hourly. Dr. Farnsworth's instructions carefully followed. Scout lay near the foot of her bed, a quiet sentinel. On the third day, her eyes opened and stayed open. A raspy breath preceded her weak attempt to speak. "Where am I?" she croaked, her voice like a rusted hinge. Wyatt stepped closer, relief flooding him. "You're at the Colton Ranch, about 15 miles south of Cheyenne," he said gently. "My name's Wyatt Colton. My dog Scout found you half buried in snow." She blinked in confusion, her gaze darting around the room as if trying to piece together her memories. After several moments, she spoke again, though her voice trembled. I'm Annie," she said at last, eyes glistening with tears. It was the only name she could recall. When Wyatt pressed for a surname or family ties, she shook her head in frustration. "I don't remember." Everything so foggy, she admitted panic creeping into her voice. Sympathy mingled with wariness in Wyatt's heart. He could tell her injuries were real, her fear genuine. Yet the puzzle of her identity gnawed at him. Why had she been wandering alone in such hostile conditions? Who had inflicted those bruises and broken ribs? Annie recounted disjointed flashes. A carriage ride with a man whose face she couldn't recall, a heated argument, the taste of coppery fear on her tongue. Then nothing but the freezing darkness of the storm. Dr. Farnsworth warned that her memory might take time to return. Word spread among the ranch hands about Annie's fragile state and her uncertain past. Folks exchanged rumors by the stables, whispering that perhaps she was an outlaw on the run or a victim of bandits. Dale Abernathy, fiercely loyal to Wyatt, kept an open mind, but remained cautious. After all, any newcomer to the ranch brought potential trouble. And in the West, trouble often came with a gun or a grudge. Wyatt dismissed the rumors, too focused on nursing Annie back to health, determined to let the truth emerge in its own time. One evening, as Wyatt helped Annie sip some broth, she stared at his face a moment longer than usual. "Your name?" "Colton," she murmured. Wyatt noticed the furrow in her brow, the way she searched his expression for answers. "It sounds so familiar," she said, pressing a trembling hand to her forehead. Something about his name, or perhaps the ring of it, struck a chord in her memory. The moment passed as quickly as it came, leaving them both unsettled. For Wyatt, a slow realization took root, whether by fate or mere chance. This woman's life was now entwined with his own. The days trudged on cold and quiet. Annie's strength gradually returned. She could stand and even shuffle about with help. Her bruises began to fade, yet the mystery of her past lingered like a dark cloud overhead. Midway through January, as the sun set over the western horizon, two strangers rode up to the ranch. Wyatt stepped onto the porch, hand resting on the revolver at his hip. The taller man introduced himself as Frederick Langley, a traveling salesman from St. Louis. The other, Maxwell Reed, claimed to be his partner in the endeavor. Something about their polished manner and forced smiles set Wyatt on edge. Langley, all sharp grins and sales patter, was allegedly selling fine linens and coffee beans from back east. He expressed surprise to find a ranch so far from town, then politely asked whether Wyatt had happened across anyone traveling during the recent storm. Wyatt played it cool, mentioning only that he'd seen footprints here and there. But as Langley's gaze lingered on the ranch house, Wyatt's instincts flared. He noticed Reed scanning the property, eyes narrowed in a predatory way. When Wyatt casually remarked that they should find lodging in Cheyenne before dark, Langley's forced grin faltered. "We were hoping for a night's rest here," he said. Despite his reservations, Wyatt couldn't refuse them outright. Western tradition held hospitality in high regard, and the men had done nothing overtly hostile. So he invited them inside, served black coffee in chipped mugs, and introduced them to Dale. Annie, however, was safely tucked away in her room upstairs. Scout, ever watchful, growled softly when the strangers stepped too close. Langley noticed the dog's wariness and forced a laugh, but the tension in the room was palpable. As the evening wore on, Wyatt found his suspicions growing. He resolved to keep a careful eye on both men throughout the night. Later, while showing Langley and Reed to the spare bunks in the barn, Wyatt recalled that Annie had mentioned a carriage ride in her fragmented memories. Could these men be connected? He tried to engage them in small talk, fishing for clues. Langley boasted about his travels from Denver to Salt Lake City and back, while Reed stayed mostly silent. Wyatt noticed that whenever the conversation strayed near the topic of winter travel or violent storms, Reed's eyes flickered with unease. After settling them in, Wyatt double-checked the barn doors. Something in him whispered that all was not as it seemed. Through a crack in the bedroom door, Annie watched the men from upstairs. Though her recollection was still blurred, something about Reed, especially his demeanor and the shape of his jaw, flicked a spark of terror in her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. A fleeting image flashed behind her eyes. A man shouting at her in a rattling carriage, his hand raised in violence. Was it Reed? Her breath came in shallow spurts. She had to warn Wyatt, but she wasn't entirely sure what she was warning him against. The West was rife with dangers, some from without, others from within. Annie woke the next morning drenched in sweat, her dreams haunted by echoes of a conflict she couldn't fully recall. Yet piece by piece her memory returned in fragments. She remembered a name, Harrison McAllister, the man who'd arranged some sort of journey for her. She remembered receiving a letter from a woman named Margaret Colton, who had written about a long-standing family agreement. Annie wasn't sure how it all fit together, but the mention of the Colton name jolted her. She resolved to speak with Wyatt at the earliest chance, determined to uncover the truth behind this swirling mystery. Wyatt found her downstairs, leaning against the kitchen table for support. Concern lit his features as he hurried to steady her. "You ought to be resting," he scolded gently, but Annie shook her head. "I need to talk to you," she insisted, voice quavering. Guiding her to a chair, Wyatt poured a cup of warm tea. Annie took a sip, summoning courage. "Before I lost my memory, I received a letter from someone named Margaret Colton. The letter mentioned your family," she said, her eyes searching his. Wyatt froze the mug halfway to his lips. Margaret Colton was his mother's name. Wyatt's heart pounded. He carefully set the mug down, trying to steady himself. His mother had died years ago, but he remembered talk of a family from Massachusetts, the Belle Fleur. They had an old arrangement with the Coltons, an engagement or betrothal that was never formally acted upon because the children were so young. Was Annie from that family? He had heard the name Belle Fleur in passing, but never connected it to a real person. Swallowing hard, Wyatt glanced at the upstairs hallway. Those travelers were still on the property, likely stirring in the barn. He leaned closer to Annie. "Do you recall anything else?" Before Annie could answer, Scout trotted into the room, barking urgently. The dog looked from Wyatt to Annie, then towards the window. Wyatt peered outside. Langley and Reed were saddling up, likely planning to leave. Relief washed over him. Perhaps they would go without incident. But Scout's hackles were raised, as if the dog sensed unresolved danger. Annie's hands trembled around the teacup. "That man, Maxwell Reed," she whispered. "He reminds me of someone from my nightmare. I'm afraid, Wyatt, if he's the same man who attacked me, he won't stop until I'm gone." Wyatt felt a surge of protectiveness. He placed a steady hand over Annie's. "Don't worry," he said softly. "You're safe here. I'll make sure of it." Annie's eyes locked onto his gratitude, and something else glimmering there, a nascent hope. They both understood that the men outside might be connected to her ordeal, and that the truth behind her identity was entwined with an old promise made between their families. Wyatt resolved to see her through this, no matter what it might cost him. For in that moment, he realized that Annie Belle Fleur, if that was indeed her name, was more than just a stray soul he'd rescued. She was possibly his promised bride. As the day progressed, Wyatt found his mind caught between conflicting emotions: curiosity about Annie's past, protectiveness, and a faint flicker of something deeper that he dared not name. He wasn't certain he believed in the old arrangement, but the mere idea that Annie could be the woman his parents once spoke of lit a slow burn in his chest. Meanwhile, he couldn't shake his suspicions about Frederick Langley and Maxwell Reed. He sent Dale to shadow them discreetly as they headed toward Cheyenne, hoping to uncover any hint of wrongdoing. Annie spent most of the day resting, trying to piece together more of her past. She remembered growing up in a manor house outside Boston, watching her father, Philip Bellefleur, exchange letters with an old friend out west. She recalled being told that one day she might travel there to wed a rancher's son, ensuring the union of two families. She hadn't believed it would truly happen yet, after her father's passing financial strains pressed her mother to revisit the agreement. Then came the journey fraught with tension. She remembered Maxwell Reed, now a hired guard, who had turned on her somewhere near Cheyenne. The puzzle pieces snapped into place. Maxwell Reed was planned to escort her safely, but for reasons unknown, he had tried to harm her, or worse, before she ever reached the Colton ranch. Annie felt a surge of anger and fear. Was it mere greed? Or had Reed been following orders from someone else? She also recalled that she carried a small fortune in her trunk jewelry letters and a gold locket engraved with the Bellefleur crest. It was likely all gone now. The notion that Reed had stolen her dowry curdled her stomach, but it also reignited her determination. Gathering her courage, Annie asked Wyatt to confirm what she suspected. With a reluctant sigh, he explained that yes, the Coltons had once been promised to unite with the Bellefleurs. But the West was harsh, and life had drifted them apart. He'd never taken the arrangement seriously. "I've always believed in forging my own path," he said. "Still, if you're Annie Bellefleur, then we share a complicated bond." His cheeks reddened beneath his tanned skin. Annie felt her heart flutter, torn between embarrassment and a strange warmth at the closeness implied by that bond. Despite the swirl of confusion, Wyatt vowed to help Annie uncover the truth and to protect her from Maxwell Reed if necessary. Annie, for her part, realized that Wyatt's kindness and strength were genuine. They offered a shelter she desperately needed. She sensed in him a reluctance to be bound by old customs, but also a willingness to do right by her in her time of need. And so they formed a fragile alliance, each aware that the looming confrontation with Reed would test their resolve. The snows were beginning to melt, but the road ahead promised danger, and possibly a future neither had envisioned. While Wyatt and Annie wrestled with their shared history, Dale Abernathy rode into Cheyenne, trailing Frederick Langley and Maxwell Reed. Posing as a casual ranch hand out for supplies, he kept his distance. Cheyenne's streets were coated in slush-dirty snow, trampled by wagons and horses. Dale noted that Langley and Reed headed to a modest hotel near the railroad station. Slipping into the saloon across the street, Dale ordered a whiskey and settled in, watching through the grimy windows. As fortune would have it, Frederick Langley soon entered the saloon. He didn't notice Dale in the corner. Instead, he sat at a table with a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a black Stetson, an individual Dale recognized as Archer Thompson, a known gambler and rumored enforcer for hire. Leaning closer, Dale caught snippets of their conversation, references to a girl and missing trunk talk of the ranch and possible complications. It seemed Langley was anxious about finishing a job. In a hushed tone, he mentioned a name, McAllister. Dale's gut twisted. This was bigger than he'd thought. From what Dale could piece together, Harrison McAllister was the one who initially arranged Annie's safe passage, presumably to ensure the union with the Colton family. But somewhere along the line, Maxwell Reed had turned traitor. Langley lamented that Annie had vanished in the snow, and they had found no body. Archer Thompson demanded payment either way. Langley, voice trembling, insisted that McAllister only paid upon confirmation of Annie's fate. If she were alive, there'd be a high bounty for her safe return, or for her silence should she threaten McAllister's plans. None of it was entirely clear, but the conversation confirmed one thing: Annie was still in danger. Dale slipped out the back door of the saloon, heart pounding. He realized that if Archer Thompson was involved, violence was guaranteed. The man was known to solve problems with bullets. Dale hurried to stable his horse. As he did, Maxwell Reed emerged from the hotel, scanning the street as if sensing a spy. Dale ducked behind a wagon, holding his breath until Reed moved on. His instincts screamed at him to return to the ranch and warn Wyatt. Annie's trouble ran deeper than a simple mugging. A storm of betrayal and greed swirled around her, and the eye of that storm would soon fix on Colton Ranch. Pushing his horse to gallop, Dale returned under the cover of dusk. Wyatt and Annie met him by the corral as soon as he arrived. Gasping for breath, Dale recounted the conversation he'd overheard. Annie paled at the mention of McAllister's name. She recalled him as a distant cousin, someone who'd orchestrated her father's affairs after his death. Could he have planned her journey solely to claim her inheritance, or force some advantage? Fury and betrayal raged in her heart. Wyatt's jaw tightened. They now knew the threat was real and determined. The next step was clear. Prepare for a confrontation, because trouble was galloping their way. Realizing an attack might be imminent, Wyatt began fortifying the ranch. He checked every fence line, reinforced barn doors, and ensured rifles and ammunition were ready. The ranch hands were briefed. Some scoffed at the idea that city slickers like Langley and Reed could pose a real threat. Others had heard rumors of Archer Thompson's deadly reputation. Annie, still weakened but improving daily, insisted on helping. She practiced loading a rifle, her hands shaking slightly. Wyatt saw the determination in her eyes and admired her resolve, but a part of him wished to shield her from the ugliness that was sure to come. Late one night, as the household slept, Annie found Wyatt on the porch, staring at the moonlit snowfields. Silently, she stepped beside him, feeling the cold bite her cheeks. The tension between them was thick, a mix of lingering questions and unspoken attraction. In the dim light, Annie's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I wish I could remember everything clearly," she whispered. "I hate not knowing who to trust." Wyatt laid a reassuring hand on hers. "You can trust me," he said softly. The gentleness in his voice sent warmth through her despite the cold night. In that fragile moment, Wyatt confessed his own turmoil, how he had once rejected the notion of an arranged marriage, swearing never to let tradition dictate his life. Yet here he stood, drawn inexplicably to the woman who might be his promised bride. Annie listened, heart-pounding. She admitted she once resented the arrangement, too longing for freedom from family expectations. But she'd grown to see marriage as a potential escape from financial ruin back east. Now, as they stood shoulder to shoulder, they realized that the arrangement was neither shackle nor salvation. It was a path they had to walk together in uncertain territory. For a brief instant, they shared a look that transcended words. The swirl of emotions, fear, relief, desire, overcame them. Wyatt leaned closer, and Annie, breath catching, tilted her face up. Their lips met softly, tentatively, but the spark of connection was electric. The kiss lasted only a moment, but it carried all their confusion and hope. When they parted, Annie's cheeks burned and Wyatt's heart hammered. They stood there, snow glittering around them, anchored in a rare moment of solace. Tomorrow, the threat loomed, but for now, they embraced the warmth of this fragile understanding. At dawn, a new determination set in. Annie resumed her attempts to remember critical details, anything about McAllister's plan, or the location of her trunk. Meanwhile, Wyatt organized the ranch hands into watch shifts. Scout patrolled restlessly, picking up the anxiety in the air. Dale readied his rifle with the steady calm of a man who'd fought in worse battles. Each person braced for the confrontation that might come that very day or the next. The West was unforgiving, and the shadow of violence lengthened across Colton Ranch. In that hush before the storm, Wyatt and Annie clung to their burgeoning bond, steeled by the knowledge that together they would stand and fight. Just after midday, a thin plume of dust appeared on the horizon. Wyatt watched from the porch rifle in hand as a small posse of riders approached Frederick, Langley, Maxwell, Reed, Archer, Thompson, and 2 more men. They reined in their horses just out of rifle range, forming a line that spoke of intimidation. Wyatt could almost feel their malice. His stomach knotted, but he forced himself to remain calm. Dale stood at his side, jaw set. Behind them, the ranch hands took up positions ready to defend their home. Archer Thompson raised a hand. "We're here to talk," he called. His voice carried an arrogant confidence. Wyatt stepped forward cautiously. "Talk about what he demanded." Thompson gave a smile that never reached his eyes. "We have business with the young lady you're harboring. She belongs to us." Wyatt's grip tightened on his rifle. "She doesn't belong to anyone," he shot back. "We know she's Annie Bellefleur, and we know she carries a valuable inheritance. Hand her over, or things will get bloody." Beside Thompson, Maxwell Reed sneered, touching the butt of his revolver. Wyatt refused. "She's under my protection. If you want to talk, come inside, unarmed. Otherwise, get off my land." Thompson's expression darkened. For a moment it seemed he might negotiate, but Maxwell Reed spat on the ground. "Enough talk," he snapped. Then, without warning, a rifle cracked. A bullet whizzed past Wyatt, striking the porch post behind him. The ranch hands returned fire, and chaos erupted. Horses reared, men yelled, and thunderous gunshots echoed across the snowy yard. Wyatt dropped to one knee, returning fire. Dale barked orders controlling the ranch hands. 2 of Thompson's men circled around the barn, aiming to flank them. Annie, inside the house, peered through a window. Fear churned her stomach, but she remembered Wyatt's promise to keep her safe. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed a loaded rifle and slipped out the back door. If she was the cause of this trouble, she refused to cower while others bled for her. Rounding the house, Annie spotted one of the hired guns creeping along a side wall, attempting to get a clear shot at Wyatt. Terror and adrenaline surged. She steadied the rifle breath ragged. The man lifted his gun, aimed at Wyatt's exposed flank. Annie fired. Her shot went wheat, but the crack startled the attacker, who stumbled and turned. A ranch hand took advantage of his confusion, landing a bullet in the man's shoulder. The gunman dropped with a howl. Annie gasped, heart-pounding, tears threatening. Yet her bold action might have saved Wyatt's life. In that instant, she realized there was no going back. She was part of this fight now, and she would see it through. The firefight at Colton Ranch erupted with sudden, savage intensity. The air split with rifle cracks as bullets thudded into wood and snow alike. Wyatt dropped to one knee behind a barrel near the porch, returning fire with practiced calm. Dale barked orders from behind a hay wagon, directing the ranch hands to cover the flanks. They moved like men who knew the land and had everything to lose. Archer Thompson, leading the attackers, cursed loudly as two of his riders were pinned down behind the corral fence. McAllister's men had expected fear and surrender. They were instead met with resistance forged in hardship and loyalty. Inside the house, Annie pressed her back to the wall, breathing hard. The windows rattled with the violence outside. She spotted movement through the glass, a gunman circling toward the side of the house, rifle raised. Her pulse thundered. Grabbing the loaded rifle Wyatt had given her earlier, she slipped out the kitchen door. Snow crunched under her boots, and the cold stung her skin. But she ignored it. Rounding the corner, she spotted the man crouched and aiming directly at Wyatt's exposed side. "Not today," she whispered, raising her gun. Her shot went wide, but it startled the attacker. He whirled, exposing his flank, just as Dale's bullet found its mark. The man dropped with a shout, writhing in the snow. Annie trembled, but did not fall. She'd saved Wyatt's life, and she knew it. Emboldened by Annie's act, the ranch hands redoubled their effort. Two flanking attackers were pushed back behind a thicket of trees. Thompson roared with frustration, trying to rally his crew. Wyatt, seeing the momentum shift, moved from cover and advanced toward the barn. A shot grazed his coat sleeve, but he pressed on. Beside the stables, one of McAllister's hired guns surrendered, throwing down his rifle and raising his hands. Scout bounded past him, barking and driving two more gunmen back. The dog's presence was a blur of motion and fury, defending the land with fierce devotion. Maxwell Reed, still on horseback, spotted Annie out in the open and turned his mount toward her. His eyes blazed with hatred as he drew his revolver, intent on finishing what he started. But Wyatt saw him first. From across the yard he shouted Annie down. She dropped as Wyatt fired. The shot ricocheted off the saddle horn, startling Reed's horse. The beast reared, and Reed was thrown crashing into the snow. He scrambled to his feet, but a ranch hand was on him in seconds, disarming him with a punch that left blood on the snow. Realizing the battle was lost, Archer Thompson waved a white handkerchief from behind a wagon. "Hold your fire," he shouted, stepping into view with his hands half raised. "Let's talk like gentlemen." Wyatt approached cautiously, rifle still aimed. Dale and two others flanked him for support. Thompson's eyes darted between them. "We just want the girl. Hand her over, and we walk away." Wyatt shook his head slowly. "You brought war to my home. You shot at my people. You'll walk away when I say you can, and it won't be with her." Dale cocked his rifle. "Might want to start praying, Thompson." Annie stepped forward, then rifle in hand, her cheeks flushed from cold and fury. "I remember now," she said, voice loud enough to carry. "You work for McAllister. You and Reed ambushed me near Cheyenne and left me for dead. You did it so he could control my estate and erase my name." Thompson sneered. "You were never supposed to survive." "But I did," she said evenly. "And I'm not afraid of you anymore." The declaration hit like a crack of thunder. Wyatt looked at her with pride in his eyes, and even Thompson seemed rattled. She was no longer the frail woman found in the snow. She was a survivor and a fighter. Seeing no path to victory, Thompson snarled and lowered his hands. "This isn't over," he growled. "McAllister has deeper pockets than you can imagine. He'll bring men, lawyers, judges. The East doesn't care about your dust and dirt." Wyatt stepped closer, the barrel of his rifle mere inches from Thompson's chest. "Then let him come. But next time I won't stop at warning shots." With a bitter curse, Thompson backed away. Reed, bloodied and limping, was hauled onto a horse. The remaining men gathered their wounded and retreated, leaving one body behind, unclaimed and forgotten. As the hoofbeats faded into the trees, silence settled over the ranch once more. The snow was trampled and red in places, the air still thick with the smell of gunpowder. But it was over for now. Wyatt lowered his rifle chest, heaving. Annie moved to him, and he caught her in his arms. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Around them, the ranch hands emerged from cover. Dale clapped Wyatt on the back. "Held the line," he said simply. Wyatt nodded, his gaze lingering on the bloodied yard. But there'll be more. Inside the house, Annie sat at the dining table, cradling a cup of tea in both hands. Her eyes distant. Wyatt crouched beside her. "You did brave work out there," he said. "You saved me." She shook her head. "We saved each other." A moment of silence passed. "We can't wait for him to strike again," she said. "Next time, we don't just survive, we go after him. With the law, with proof, with everything we have." Wyatt took her hand, his calloused fingers curling over hers. "Then we ride to Cheyenne. We find allies. And we finish this for good." The day after the shootout dawned cold and silent. Smoke still rose from the bullet-torn fences and scorched barn door. The Colton ranch had survived, but something in the air felt irrevocably changed. Wyatt walked the perimeter with Dale, both men checking the damage and making quiet notes of what needed mending. One ranch hand nursed a grazed shoulder, but the enemy had fared worse. One man dead, another wounded, and the rest driven off. They buried the fallen gunman at the far edge of the property, marking his grave with a stone pile. Though the man had come with violence in his heart, Wyatt gave a moment of silence. "No one wakes up wishing to die far from home," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Inside the house, Annie sat by the fire, her fingers trembling slightly as she stitched up a torn blanket. Her thoughts kept drifting to the sound of gunfire, to the moment she'd raised a rifle and fired not just in defense, but with intention. That single action had shifted something in her. She wasn't just a lost girl anymore. She was part of this place. And she had blood on her hands, even if indirectly. Her mind wandered to the man who had fallen. Did he have a family? A past he was trying to run from? The West was merciless in how it sorted good from bad, and sometimes it didn't sort at all. Annie felt her heart crack open with a strange kind of grief. Not for the dead man, exactly, but for all the innocence she could never reclaim. That evening, as the wind returned with a low howl, a rider appeared on the horizon. Wrapped in a thick coat and bearing the seal of Cheyenne's central office, he handed Wyatt a letter before galloping off without a word. Wyatt broke the wax and read in grim silence. Annie approached, sensing the chill in the air wasn't just from the cold. "It's from McAllister," Wyatt said, voice low. Annie's stomach dropped. The letter, written in neat, perfumed script, demanded her immediate return to his care. McAllister cited her delicate emotional condition, her unsanctioned absence, and above all, his legal guardianship under her father's will. There was a veiled threat at the bottom if Wyatt did not cooperate. McAllister would ensure the Colton ranch would face investigations, fines, and ruin. Enclosed with the letter was a copy of the Bellefleur family, will the one Annie had long feared existed. She took the papers in trembling hands and read through the formal language. McAllister had been granted temporary power over her estate, her travel, and even her engagement until her 21st birthday. Her breath caught as she realized the truth. He hadn't escorted her west for her benefit. He had intended to marry her off to someone of his choosing, or worse, let her die and claim control of everything. "He's using my father's will like a weapon," she whispered. This was never about family. It was always about control. Wyatt stood beside her, his face stormy. He gently took the will from her lap and tossed it onto the hearth. The flames caught the edge, instantly curling the paper in orange licks. "That paper means nothing if it goes against what's right," he said. Annie turned to him, startled. "But the law." "The law don't mean much out here when it's in the hands of vipers," he said. "You are not his to command, and if he wants to bring hell down on us, let him try. He'll find out just how hard we fight when we've got something worth defending." Annie blinked back tears. "You'd risk everything for me." Wyatt met her gaze without hesitation. "I already have. I just didn't realize until now." That night they sat by the hearth in silence, Scout curled at their feet, and the air thick with unspoken words. Annie turned to Wyatt, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if he does come back? With more men? With more lies?" Wyatt leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then we stand our ground together. But we're not waiting for him to strike first. Tomorrow, we ride into Cheyenne. We bring the fight to him with evidence, with allies, with the truth." He paused, then added, "You've already shown you're braver than most men I've ever met. You're not alone in this. You've got me. You've got all of us." Annie felt something shift inside her, an anchor drop into place. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming her voice, her name, her future. She nodded slowly. "Then let's burn his lies down, brick by brick. Let's make sure the next time he sends a message, it's from a jail cell." Wyatt grinned that slow, crooked smile she'd come to cherish. "Now you sound like a Colton." Their fingers found each other's across the space between them, rough and calloused, but certain. Tomorrow would not be easy. But tomorrow they would rise and begin a new chapter, not defined by fear or bloodlines, but by choice. The days after McAllister's threatening letter were a flurry of tense activity. Wyatt, Annie, and Dale rode into Cheyenne under the cover of snowfall to meet with Bernard Harlow, a sharp-tongued lawyer with no patience for corruption. They met inside the back room of the general store, away from curious eyes and ears. McAllister's abused his position. Harlow growled, flipping through the forged documents Annie had brought. "If we can prove fraud, coercion, or even intent to harm, we've got grounds to strip him of his authority and land him in jail." Dr. Farnsworth joined them, offering to testify to Annie's condition upon arrival and the attempt on her life. The sheriff, Charles Caldwell, a man of few words and deep integrity, agreed to review the evidence. "If it holds, I'll ride with you. But make no mistake, men like McAllister don't go down quiet." Back at the ranch, dawn broke over the horizon like fire licked across the sky. Annie stood bundled on the porch, gazing out at the land she now felt tethered to. "If we fail today, he'll take everything," she murmured. Wyatt stepped beside her, laying a warm hand on her shoulder. "Then we won't fail." They had boarded windows, posted sentries, and loaded every rifle on the property. Dale had even constructed crude barriers from hay bales and wagon wheels to slow any charge. The men were tense, but resolved. "If they're coming," Wyatt said quietly, "we meet them standing tall." With the threat of battle hanging like storm clouds, Wyatt and Annie made a choice that caught the entire ranch off guard. They decided to marry. Not because of some old agreement Wyatt told her, but because I can't imagine facing today without knowing you're mine, and I'm yours. They asked Dr. Farnsworth to officiate, and under a bare cottonwood tree, wrapped in scarves and heavy coats with sau. Crunching underfoot, they exchanged simple vows. Annie's hands shook as she spoke. I choose you, Wyatt Colton, not out of duty but love. Dale Scout and half a dozen ranch hands stood as witnesses. When Wyatt slipped a ring on Annie's finger, a modest silver band once belonging to his mother, the ranch held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause. In that frozen stillness, love found a foothold. But peace was fleeting. Not 30 minutes later, a plume of dust marred the white horizon. Riders. Many of them. Wyatt spotted Archer Thompson at the head, his tall form unmistakable. Flanking him was Harrison McAllister himself, dressed in a long black coat and a sneer that could curdle milk. A dozen men rode behind them, armed and ready. Looks like he brought the whole crooked club, Dale muttered. Let's show 'em we're not bluffing. Wyatt took position at the center of the yard, rifle at his side, with Annie not far behind. She was armed, yes, but more importantly, she was unafraid. The posse drew up in formation just outside the main gate. McAllister's voice rang out. I've come for my ward. You're harboring her unlawfully, and I have every legal right to remove her. Wyatt stepped forward. She's not your ward anymore. You lost that right the moment you sent men to kill her. Archer Thompson laughed bitterly. You'll need more than cowboy courage to stop us. Annie stepped out beside Wyatt, voice steady despite her racing heart. I am no longer your property. I'm Annie Colton now. You have no hold on me. McAllister's face twisted in rage. Then you forced my hand. Just as McAllister reached for his holster, a shout came from the barn. Sheriff Caldwell emerged with Bernard Harlow and 2 deputies at his side, rifles ready. That's far enough, Harrison Caldwell called. I've seen the documents. You're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and misappropriation of estate funds. McAllister's men shifted uneasily. This is a private matter, McAllister snapped. Not anymore, Harlow said, holding up a signed revocation of executorship. You've abused your power, falsified travel records, and diverted funds meant for Annie's protection. It's over. The ranch bristled with lawmen stepping out from sheds and corrals. McAllister had ridden into a trap. For a moment, everything stood still. Then Archer Thompson made his move. With a shout, he spurred his horse forward, gun drawn. To hell with lawmen, he roared. Shots rang out. Wyatt dove to shield Annie. Dale fired from the porch, striking a man from his saddle. One of McAllister's hired guns tried to flee and was tackled by a deputy. Thompson aimed directly at the sheriff, but Scout, the loyal dog, lunged from the side, knocking the man's arm. His bullet went wild. Before he could recover, Wyatt fired. Thompson fell from his horse, groaning, his pistol clattering across the ice. With his enforcer down and his posse in disarray, McAllister paled. You fools don't know who you're dealing with, he spat. I have friends in Washington, in Boston. Sheriff Caldwell stepped up, slapping iron shackles on him. Then write 'em from your cell. Annie stood still as McAllister was dragged away, watching the man who'd tried to control her fate finally lose his grip. Her breath came in short gasps, not from fear, but release. It's over, she whispered. It's finally over. Wyatt wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. No, he said softly. It's just beginning. As the sun rose higher, casting gold across the bloodied snow, the ranch slowly returned to life. Deputies collected weapons and escorted the surviving gunmen into town. Dr. Farnsworth tended to a few scrapes and bruises. Scout limped slightly from his heroic leap, and Annie knelt beside him, pressing her face to his fur in gratitude. Bernard Harlow assured them the legal proceedings would favor Annie's full claim over the Bellefleur estate. "You've got justice on your side now," he said. That and the entire town talking about the Coltons' courage. In the days that followed, Annie worked with Wyatt to repair the ranch, not just the buildings, but the very spirit of the place. She wrote letters to distant cousins, declaring her freedom and new life. They began plans for a schoolhouse nearby, something her father once dreamed of funding. Wyatt resumed his ranching duties, though now with Annie riding beside him, laughing under a shared blanket of sky. They were not just survivors, they were partners. And though the West still held dangers, they'd proven one truth beyond all others. Love born in hardship could carve out a legacy no man could steal. In the end, Colton Ranch emerged from those bitter trials stronger than before. Annie and Wyatt nurtured their hard-earned love, proving that even in the harshest frontier, hope can bloom like wishbone-flowers in spring. Their shared determination shattered Harrison McAllister's twisted scheme, ensuring Annie's inheritance would go where her father intended, into building a future uniting the Coltons and Bellefleur in spirit, if not by old customs alone. If this story of devotion, courage, and destiny caught your imagination, help keep the legend alive, like this video to show your support. Leave a comment sharing your favorite twist in the tale, and subscribe to this channel for more epic Wild West adventures. Spread the word to fellow fans of frontier drama, because out here on the plains, every shared story blazes a trail of inspiration for those who believe in love and justice. Thank you, partners, and ride on.